Hello, and welcome to Marketing Global Edition with me, Jasmine Montgomery.
And me, Piers Geiler.
So, Piers, today we're going to talk about brand naming cock-ups, how to avoid them, and what to do if you accidentally end up in the middle of one.
So there's going to be some rude words, no doubt, a few swear words, a few sexual innuendos. So I would suggest if that's something that offends you, I would turn this off now.
Really seriously do. I mean, Piers, I'm slightly worried that this entire episode is just going to be you and me giggling at like hilarious names. I thought we should just warm everybody up by talking about some of our favorite examples. And, I wanted to start with, there's an awful lot of, you can find, incidents of kind of weird niche brands, of course. So I thought I would start just to prove a point with a big one, a big brand that we've all heard of, because, I want to make the point that this can happen to anybody, big or small, any company. So my first example is Nintendo. So they launched something that unfortunately came to market with the name Nintendo DS Touch Dick. And they obviously rebranded it hastily to Touch Dictionary. So, but I don't know. I mean, how these things happen, we're going to go into in a few minutes. We're going to look at how to avoid these things, but that's a pretty big one. I really, I think when you're going into a category, what you absolutely have to look at is, is there a total and utter like no-go space? So, if you were in the diaper market, you would never call a brand pedo. Unless you were located in Turkey, where pedo is a manufacturer of baby diapers. I would have thought that a simple Google check, which, by the way, returns terrifying results, don't try it, would have shown them it wasn't a great name, but there it is. And then possibly my own personal favorite, Stubbs Prosthetics, which is the name of a company that was founded by William and Barbara Stubbs. And I feel like, it's all about like, making high quality prosthetics for people without limbs. And I feel there is something slightly insensitive about the name. What about you, Piers? What are your?
I've got three bangers, as you would say, three good ones. So the first one I know of is a company. They very cleverly put two names together and end up with a really bad name. It's called Anal Tech. So Anal Tech is a really serious. It's a serious scientific company. I think they do chromatography plates or something like that. It's still up and running. It's in the US, but they took, in their wisdom, they took the word analytical and technology, and they thought they'd just, take the front bit, anal and tech, and put them together. It's a bit like
anal, Piers, anal from analytics. It's a shocker, that one.
It's, unfortunately,
that's
not
a shocker.
But
I guess they were trying to do like a Verizon or something, but yeah, that's diabolical.
I mean, it's quite a sensible approach. I mean, Instagram is instant and Telegram, cut in half and put them together. So their thinking was correct, but nevertheless, the answer was wrong. Interestingly, actually, their URL is not that. It's milesscientific.com. So they did learn their lesson a bit. But anyway, they stuck to it.
They came to a realization when they went to do their domain name.
Yeah. The second one is an Australian company called 𝐸𝐴𝐸, which is another favorite. I quite like that one. And it's a construction management company. It's phenomenally successful. Its founder was one Thomas 𝐸𝐴𝐸, who founded the company back in 1861. And despite it being a really hilarious name, it's really successful. It's got like 400 people, 3,000 contractors. It does quite well. And the last of my hilarious three is a Swedish car magazine. It's defunct now. It was in the 1950s and 60s, and it used the Swedish word for speed, which unfortunately is fart.
Oh no.
Yeah, so that's the third one.
Of course,
Anal Tech or Anal Tech, 𝐸𝐴𝐸 and fart. There you go.
Yours are far more lavatorial than mine. I have to say. I think you've probably lost us half our listeners. For those of you who are left, I have to say you guys are hardcore and well done for staying the course. Okay, right.
Okay, so listen, they're massive cock-ups, aren't they? Really.
Yeah.
Have you been responsible for anything like that? I just want to say I haven't, but I think
Oh,
you
come
may have.
on. I don't believe you. Listen, we pride ourselves on Marketing Global Edition. On, part of the joy of this program is we wash our dirty linen in public. You and I have between us, I think, 50 years of combined, experience in branding and advertising. And part of the point of this show is to give people insights into all the terrible mistakes we have made so that they don't make the same mistakes. Okay, so in which spirit, I'm going to be honest and tell our lovely listeners my two most embarrassing stories. One of them, I can't name the client, okay, but a really big company in the Middle East. I was involved in the naming, and like 3 times I came up with a different name each time that turned out to mean in Arabic a certain portion of a gentleman's anatomy that really ought not to be a brand name. And I mean, I didn't know that there were so many Arabic words for that particular anatomical bit, but there are.
Thing.
And then
there's quite a few in English, to be fair.
Let us not go there. Our poor audience are going to get enough of it without your euphemisms, Gyla. But finally, I didn't, but the team came up with a name that turned out to mean exactly the same thing, but in Hebrew. And they weren't so bothered about that because it wasn't their target market. The one I am willing to disclose on air, I was part of a team. It wasn't just me, but I was part of a team at a place you and I used to work at together that came up with Wizz Air. Now, it's a Hungarian airline that flies around Eastern Europe. I'm proud of it in 2 ways. First of all, it's a giant plane that we got painted pink. So, I mean, it looks like a giant phallus, but it also is named Wizz Air. And of course, Wizz in a lot of colloquial, English and American and so on means going for a wee. So I'm quite proud of that one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it got through, it got through partly because of sometimes it's about kind of sometimes it's a moment of narcissism or kind of, there's somebody with a very strong opinion on the client side. In this case, it was actually agency side. It wasn't me, but a colleague who just, that was the name and he wasn't going to hear anything else about it. And he pushed it through. And I mean, it also means speed and, whizzing about. So it was just a double entendre, but it's interesting, I think.
You imbue any name with meaning, and actually Wizz Air, we've all heard of it now, It's okay, really. So,
it's done great.
Stick with it.
It's done great, and I'm actually flying it to Romania in October. So I hope they, don't take this out on me for mocking them on air. So interestingly, there are kind of like, I think it's interesting to look at the types of cock-up, if you like, and how to avoid them. So really, I think when it comes to naming, it seems to me that there are 3 types, which I want to discuss and see how, we can help clients, companies big and small, like, who are people who are listening to this, avoid these mistakes. I think one is, a common one is just lost in translation, right? You come up with a name and then it turns out to mean something really rude. And, you come up with it in English and then in Spanish, it means something rude. You come up with it in Chinese and it means something rude in Bahasa, Indonesia or whatever. So that's about kind of linguistics. And we'll talk about those in a second. Sometimes I think, founders, people name things after founders, particularly things like law firms, they name them after partners. And some people have really funny names, and if you are Mr. Bottom, you may end up deciding that you are so enamored with the illustrious name of Bottom that you wish to call your company that, as well as your poor long-suffering children. So we'll talk about that. And then there's one that I think is really tough. And I think we call it the sort of shifting sands, where basically you invest in a name, it's great, it's sound, it's viable, it doesn't have any negative connotations. And then times change and the associations to do with that word change through no fault of your own, through no fault of your brand. And we're going to talk about what to do in that situation too.
Okay, Jasmine. So we start with the first one then. Let's start with lost in translation.
Yeah.
I've got an example for you. I mean, if you're in Dubai or anyone in Dubai can happily drive around in a big 4x4 called a Mitsubishi. Now, is it Pajero or Pajero?
Oh,
I don't actually know.
I defer.
Anyway, I'm going to say Pajero. The majority of normal people know that. So Mitsubishi Pajero. And but in Spain, in Americas, and in India, it's known as the Montero. In the UK, bizarrely, it's called Shogun, actually. Anyway, the reason for all those different names is because Pajero means something rude in some countries and it doesn't in others. In Spanish, Pajero sounds very much like, and I have to say this carefully, it's the slang term for somebody who has a fondness of playing with themselves.
Oh dear.
So yeah, so that's one example
that is very
of
unfortunate.
translation. Yeah, go.
Okay. That's fascinating. So, I mean, my understanding is that it happened quite a lot with car brands. You know, they're always looking for names. I named a car brand in Singapore once, but nothing terrible happened, so I won't tell that story now. But one that we came across when we were doing some research for this podcast, which cracked me up, was Japan's second largest tourist agency, who was very mystified when it entered English-speaking markets and suddenly began receiving requests for really unusual sex tours. And upon making some inquiries, the owners of Kinky Nippon Tourist Company realized what was going on, and they changed Kinky Nippon Tourist Company to KNT in English-speaking countries. And I think that just cracked me up, that one.
So how to avoid this sort of stuff is just always do linguistic checks. Check your name, what it means in different languages. So I mean, fine, in England, you know, check what it means in English, but really you've got to check other languages too. I mean, no matter where you are in Europe, you know, I'd be doing French, German, Spanish, English. You know, if you're over in Asia, you might be doing Urdu, Chinese, Malay. You know, you do have to do quite a lot of different languages, and there are people who can help you do this. It's not an impossible task, but it's really important. Otherwise, things can get wrong, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I think, you know, thinking about not just your language or the language of your markets, but like, you know, if you were in, you know, even if like if you were in West Africa, but you were in, I don't know, you were thinking about maybe one day expanding, you know, you want to check Swahili, you want to check Portuguese, you want to check the other languages spoken on the continent, perhaps Arabic, and always check English. I mean, just always check English, because, you know, why be named Kinky Tourism? You know, it's just hilarious.
In some countries, though, isn't it? Look at like Nigeria. How many languages are spoken in Nigeria? It's a formal amount of languages. So, you know, can get quite time consuming, I could imagine, in some places, actually.
Yeah, totally. I've been known to go to a Chinese restaurant, find a waiter and ask him to check it in Chinese for me. I mean, there are shortcuts, you know, but if in doubt, hire a translation agency.
Yeah, or live in London. You know, there's so many.
Yeah, you'll find everybody here. That's so true. That's so true.
Okay, that's the first one, lost in translation. The second one you mentioned is about the internal perspective. Now, there was an ad agency. It's quite a funny. Well, it's not. I'll never say it's a funny story because it never is when you say that. But there's an ad agency that was called Wong, Doody, Crandall, and Wiener, and you know they decided that would be too long a name to keep, so they did change it, and there is some some funny words in there.
Never mind length. I mean, hilarity of names. Bless them.
Wong, Doody, Crandall, and Wiener changed its name to Wong, Wiener, it depends how you read it, yeah. Changed its name to Wong Doody. Which one's better, Jasmine? Wong Doody or Wong, Doody, Crandall, and Wiener?
I think poor Mr. or Ms. Crandall really drew the short straw, partnering up with Wong, Doody, and Wiener. I mean, if I were Crandall, frankly, I'd have struck out on my own. But good luck to them.
There's a much more interesting one. There's a Boring Business Systems started by a bloke called Alan Boring, and they kept with it, and they use it as a funny thing. They embrace it, and they say, you know, our business is anything but boring. Might be in the name, but not in the service. And they've used it for a very long time now. It's very good, very successful. You know,
well, I applaud the chutzpah in that. That's really funny. I think it happens a lot in law firms where, you know, you get the partner names. I sometimes imagine the naming brainstorm, you know, where imagine somebody comes in and goes like, I know, listen, we're a Magic Circle top London law firm. Let's call ourselves Massacre and June. You know, you think it wouldn't happen. And yet I present to you Slaughter and May, one of the top law firms in London. You know, they have pulled it off. I mean, spectacularly. Massacre, slaughter. I don't know how you do that. You know, if somebody came along and said, right, we're going to call ourselves Jones and Uterus, everyone would fall about laughing. And yet Allen and Overy, again, you know, started by George Allen and Thomas Overy, and they were proud of their names. Dear Mr. Overy was, you know, he was going to put his name above the door, and he has, and it's an incredibly successful firm, and hats off to them.
Another example like that is that German industrial giant Siemens. I mean, really, if I came up with Siemens in a brainstorm, I'd probably, you know, I'd have trouble getting that one through, I reckon.
I'm very pure of mind, Piers. I've seen that name for years. I've never thought of it as rude. But now that you mention it, yeah, I think that's funny. That's very humorous. Okay, so there are some really basic ways to do prevention, do just really basic consumer research, you know? If you're using your name, if you're a partner, if you're a founder, just ask 20 people of different backgrounds. And if any of them fall off their chair laughing, like maybe just don't use your name. There are people that have a misconception that like if it's their name, they'll definitely be allowed to use it, which isn't true actually. If somebody's already trademarked your name, by the way, you can't. So simply using your name, and you know, sometimes people move on from a business. So lending your name to a business is not always the best thing to do. And if you're, you know, called Mr. Derriere, you know, maybe just don't. Okay, so the third one is what we call shifting sands, right? So this is where you adopt a perfectly sound name and then everything around you goes to hell in a handbag. So, you know, if in, I don't know, the, you know, 20 or 30 years ago, you had very honorably named your business after Isis, the Egyptian goddess Isis, goddess of protection, magic, motherhood, and healing, you'd be really troubled when in 2014, you know, Isis became a major terrorist organization. And there have been quite a lot of, you know, businesses. I remember in Bahrain, always walking past ISIS restaurant, right when ISIS was, the terrorist organization was at, you know, at their zenith, and just thinking, seriously, you need a name change. But ISIS Pharmaceuticals initially said they weren't going to change their name, but eventually they did. And they said, you know, we decided to change our company name because when people see our name, we want them to think about the life-saving medicines that we're developing, which is absolutely fair enough. And boy, is that a moment to change.
I've got another one. It's a darker one, really. Most of mine I like to have funny ones, but I find this one a little bit sad, really. So in the 1930s, there was an appetite suppressant, and it started in the 30s, was very successful until the 70s, and it's called AIDS. So AYDS, but sounds like AIDS, like the, you know, the unfortunate virus syndrome, whatever we want to call it. So anyway, so you know, AIDS continued to carry on, but then of course the problem of AIDS came through in the 70s and 80s, and the problem was AIDS, the diet suppressant, makes people think a bit like like the disease of AIDS, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
But what they did, rather than rebrand, I would have told them to rename, right? But they didn't. They decided to change it slightly. So they called it, they had, one of their products was AIDS Slim, and another one was Diet AIDS. So they just didn't get it. They didn't realize they had to change.
They didn't really bite the bullet, did they?
And unfortunately, by the early 90s, they died as a company.
Wow, that's interesting.
I'm afraid so.
It's a terrible thing, this one, because you can't prevent this happening to you. I mean, this is just a tsunami that takes over, and you know, there's no amount of checking that stops this happening. So all you can do is handle the communications around the name change really well. So, you know, another ISIS example was ISIS Wallet, which was a service that allowed consumers to pay for purchases on their mobile phones, and their
what sort of purchases?
Mobile, you know, pay for any kind of purchase on their mobile.
I was joking. I was being flippant. Sorry.
Yes. And their chief executive, Michael Abbott, said, you know, it was a really hard decision, but he said, and he made a really good statement. He said, we have no interest in sharing a name with a group whose name has become synonymous with violence. And our hearts go out to those who are suffering. As a company, we have made the decision to rebrand. And I think, you know, how you handle the communications, your stakeholders always understand in these situations. I think they really understand when you say, we just don't want to be associated with this stuff. And so they rebranded to Softcard in 2014, and I think quite rightly.
Okay, well, there's another topic that's worth exploring, which is when you have a name, but you're expanding into new turf, new territories, new areas, new geographies. Yeah. So you might find that you've got your trademarked name in, I don't know, in the UK, but then you decide to go elsewhere. And in that market, someone's got the trademark of your name. So that does happen. You know, one particularly famous example is Unilever's Axe, the male deodorant. So that was started in France back in the day, and it, you know, then it expanded out to US, other markets, but then it came to places like the UK, and that trademark had already gone. Axe had gone, so they had to come up with a new name. Now, interestingly, you probably know this, but it's called Lynx. So they came up with a great alternative because they had the X from the Axe and the X for the Lynx, which was a bit of a link. So so it sort of works, but they are different names, same product, same brand.
Yeah, yeah, with a kind of X resonance. That's very interesting. Okay, listen, that's a romp through some examples. I think we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about when to change and when to stick it out. And when you do change, you know, how to do that, how to come up with a new name, you know, what's the process for coming up with a great name. But so stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute.
Marketing Global Edition is sponsored by 𝐒𝐴D𝐧𝐧𝐸, the ad generator for small businesses that serves you effective and affordable ads in seconds. And by 7 Brands, the international advertising and branding agency that has worked with clients around the world from Coca-Cola to Facebook.
Hi, we're back with Marketing Global Edition, where we're talking about naming cock-ups. So we've had some, Piers and I've had lots of fun with some examples before the break. We're going to talk now about kind of when to change. So, you know, and again, a health warning here, there's going to be some rude names. So if you're of delicate sensibilities, please switch over to something far more sensible now. So, you know, when to change. You know, if it turns out your brand name is STD Construction or, you know, Donkey Balls Chocolate, and you've come to the realization that this is not a good thing, what do you do? So I think the first thing you do is you ask yourself some tough questions. We so often get clients saying to us, oh, I've got equity in the name. There's too much equity. And then you look into it and you find out they're, you know, in one market, in one segment. Sometimes they're a business that, you know, it's business to business and they've got all their customers' email addresses and it's really easy to communicate the change. So I think you have to be realistic with yourself. How much equity do you actually have in the brand? You know, if you've built an international brand worth millions and millions of dollars and you've had the brand valued and it's on your balance sheet as $100 million brand asset, yeah, seriously think about not changing. How can you get away with it? How can you pull it off? How can you make the best of it? So do you actually have millions of pounds? Are you in tons of markets? Is it really, really difficult to change? You know, do you have the contact addresses of all your customers? As I say, if you're a consumer FMCG brand, it can take a long time when you rebrand to get people to understand that you've rebranded, to find you on the shelf again, to, you know, get suppliers, to get retailers to stock you again, all that sort of thing. But if you're a B2B brand that has 150 big customers and you've got their email addresses and you've got the sales team who can pick up the phone and talk to them and say, hey, listen, we're changing our name, because it turns out it means, you know, bed bug or bottom in Cantonese or whatever, just do it. You know, do it now. Like, do it now before you have to explain it for decades. Do you have the IP? If so, you know, that's an asset. Think about it. But also, can you style it out in some funny way? Can you make people laugh? Could you stick with it?
I totally agree, actually. I think if you've got a lot of consumer awareness, the very last thing you want to do is change your name. It's just takes so much effort to get all that equity back, to inform all your customers of all the different types. You know, it's no small thing to change a name. So really think hard. So, you know, knee-jerk reactions to problems you know, think about different ways of attacking those problems. Definitely, you know, have strategies for making, you know, communicating the fun of it, and it will just go away. If you've got a powerful brand, a good name, you know, cherish it, absolutely cherish it. So I would say stick it out. I think you know, there's a Japanese sports drink called Pocari Sweat. So I mean, it's refreshment water, right? Some sort of, you come out of the gym and you drink it, but you know, that went globally. They stuck it out. They decided to keep the name that means sweat. I mean, they're crazy, but
So
why
you
not?
buy a bottle of sweat.
You see, I would definitely.
I mean, it's a refreshment drink. I guess it replenishes your salt after you have sweated, but it's one of those things where you maybe don't want to put it on the bottle because it looks like what's inside. But hey, they've pulled it off. They've got merch. They're quite proud of it. I think, you know, often I don't know that they really even think it's that funny. They've just styled it out. Another one, and this company's German, so I'm not sure they'll have applied humor to this, but there's a company called, I don't know how to put it in any other way, but it's called Ass Compact. It is ASS Compact, right? And I don't know what was going through the minds of the branding team when they chose this name. I don't know what the story is. If anybody does know, please, you know, get in touch and let us know. But apparently they're a like capital and risk management company, and I think they have some sort of publication. Perhaps the risk they should have managed was the risk of ending up with a brand name that means bottom. But they appear to be living with it, and just in rather classic German fashion, just you know, carrying on.
Another famous brand that many of us have in our kitchens, whether it's our fridge or they do cookers as well, is Smeg. So I mean, Smeg is, well, how do you describe the word Smeg? Really,
I love this example. This is such a great example, Piers, because Smeg is like dirty, disgusting, filthy, smelly. It's just the last name in the world that should be associated with one of the world's most expensive and highly designed fridges. The point of a fridge is to keep your food from being smeggy. I mean, it's hilarious. It's just hilarious. But they certainly have styled it out. So that's a really good point.
What about different names? What about being intentionally provocative? Do you know any names like that? I can think of two.
Go on then.
French Connection UK rebranded to FC UK, which obviously reads as the swear word, but that was such a great idea. That came out a long time now, still going around. And the other one, last week we talked about Elon Musk, if you remember.
Yeah.
He owns a company called The Boring Company, because it does stuff that he finds quite boring, but he makes joy out of it. He thinks transportation's a bit boring, so good on him.
Yeah, I mean, if you are a brand with a sense of humor, then absolutely good on you. And I think quite often these will be sort of really founder-led businesses. You know, Musk can pull it off. Another thing I think pulled it off beautifully is Branson. I mean, I think if you look at Virgin, you know, Virgin Records maybe, but like Virgin Atlantic Airways, truly, if all you knew about the name, about the brand, the product was what you got from the name, you would think, why would I fly an airline that is inexperienced and probably won't go all the way?
Very well put. Very well put. So should we talk about the naming process? What's the process? What's the right process to come up with a good name?
Yeah, great question. So, you know, if you are listening to this and you are a big business, call a branding agency. There is one that we won't mention right now, but that sponsors this podcast. If you are a small business, we're going to give you some tips right now. If you're a big business, go away and give us a call. And turn this off right now, because we're about to give away all our secrets so that we can make this easier for small businesses who have to do this themselves.
So there's two things you can do to start. I mean, obviously you have a naming brainstorm, but before you do a naming brainstorm, it's worth taking some time to think about possible creative springboard platforms, if you like. So, you know, think about your product or service, whatever it is. What does it do? But more interestingly, that's the what. What's the so what? What's the end benefit that your product or service provides to its customers? And that's a really good place to start. So that's one area. Second, think about how it started, how it's made, how you provide it, where you provide it, all these different ideas. And you want to get 5 or 6 sort of creative starting points. That's one thing to do. The next thing you do is then to have a name generation session, or otherwise known as a brainstorm. So, typically, if you're a small business, you get people in the business together and friends and get in a room and, get some tea and coffee or get some alcohol, whatever, floats your boat, and some nibbles, and bring those naming platforms forth and start trying to generate names. You'll come up with loads of bad names. You'll come up with loads and loads and loads, but the idea is to get quite a lot of bad names.
Well, you'll particularly come up with a lot of bad names, Piers, because you are hilarious in these brainstorms. But I think something that's really important, if I may interrupt your process for a second, in a brainstorm, is to try to get a breadth of different types of names. And I think small businesses tend to get stuck in a rut. So I'm just going to run people through the different types of names. I mean, there are loads of different ways of dividing this up, but you've got descriptive names. And I think a lot of businesses start in this space where they want to literally describe the product or service that they are offering. And just descriptive names are things like, British Airways, Booking.com, The Body Shop, General Motors, PayPal, or this fantastic podcast. We picked a very descriptive name, Marketing Global Edition, because we are about marketing and we strive to always be very global rather than always just UK focused. So we just went with Marketing Global Edition. But you also want to start looking at things that are a little harder to brainstorm. What we call associative names that evoke something not literal about the spirit of the brand, like Orange, Amazon, Uber, Nike, Red Bull, Jaguar, Sprite. If you look at Orange Telecom, the telecom is not citrusy, juicy, and full of vitamin C, right? It's evoking an image, not literally describing the product. Obviously, you have your founders' names like Ford and Disney and so on. And as long as your name isn't, Mr. Boring or Mr. Bum, then Mrs. Bum, then we, suggest looking at it. You have acronyms, the IBMs, UPSs, DHLs, BMWs. Acronyms tend to take a long time for your customers to remember. If I said to you right now, QRT, and in 3 days' time ask you to remember that name, you probably won't. Whereas if I said to you pink polka dot giraffe, you probably would remember it. So, and then mashups like, things like Smiggle, which is the mashup of Smiles and Giggles, or Dulux, the paint brand, which is from, Dulux, from durable and luxury put together. Microsoft, those kinds of names. And then totally made up names like Kodak, Xerox, Viagra, Spotify, Google, etc., Pixar. And those names, I mean, Kodak actually chose the name because it was just had literally no meaning, and therefore it wasn't used anywhere. So they just knew that they would get great property rights to it. I mean, that's a brand that very young people listening to this podcast won't even remember. But it's a clever thing to do. But it's very hard in a brainstorm to go, right, make up a name. So we used to do something at one of the at Interbrand where I used to work in Singapore, where we would do get my team to do reverse Scrabble. We'd play Scrabble, but you only got points if the word wasn't in the Oxford English Dictionary. So you had to make up words, and then we would use those to think about names for companies.
Okay, so
also, I guess, sorry, just one last one, which is puns, things that are funny. So there's a locksmith in the UK called Sherlock Holmes, which is quite funny. Or Wright Hassel, spelt R-I-G-H-T, Hassel, the law firm, but it's a Wright Hassel, quite funny. You can come up with funny puns if you have a great sense of humor. If you don't try it.
So going back to the brainstorm, say you've had your brainstorm, you're looking to hopefully get 80, 90, 100 names, lots and lots of names. But a lot of them will be absolutely rubbish, as we talked about earlier. What you then want to do is go through and find the 10 to 12 that have a bit of interest in them, something important on them, and then put each one of those names on a blank piece of paper at the top, and then do a brainstorm on each one of those 10 to 12 names. How can we change it slightly? How can we change the writing of it? Do we add a letter to it? Do we swap things around? Is there other ways to say it? And I think, and then think you'll end up with 10 a short list of 10 interesting names at that point. And that's where you got something to go forward. And then you look at those 10 names and check them against your success criteria. You know, do you think it's going to be trademarked? Can you get URL? We'll come on to all that. The other thing I would recommend is getting interesting people in the room with you to do your brainstorm. I said just pulling people from work, but when I used to do naming, we used to pull in really different people, etymologists, crossword addicts. We even had a stand-up comedian coming to one. He was brilliant. He came back, actually. We used him quite a few times.
Wow.
So, you know, just to get some different thinking, some lateral thinking. And neurodivergent minds, those people are great. Anyone who's slightly neurodivergent, you know, a bit of lateral thinking is marvelous.
What a great idea. Those are great ideas. I think the other thing to say to people who are trying to do come up with a brand name is there is no such thing as a perfect name. And, you know, we find so often that clients are waiting for us to hit them with something that they're just going to fall in love with instantly. And I always say, people, you don't fall in love on the first date, you fall in love on like the 15th date with a name. You have to just hear something quite often before you love it. And so we try to turn people's minds around from trying to find a perfect name to trying to find a viable name, a name that doesn't do anything terrible. So the real trick is to try and tune out all the subjective stuff and just to come up with a name that meets 3 simple criteria, right? So the first one we've talked about a lot today, which is, does my name mean something terrible in another language that some of my customers might speak, or my stakeholders, you know, the journalists, investors.
Yeah.
And if so, can I live with that? And probably not, you know. Does it work online? Can I find a viable URL for the name? You know, are the handles free on social media? Does it have search engine optimization potential? You know, if you find a name that's a .com, available as a .com, jump on it, buy it. You have a unicorn, fantastic, capture it, feed it, love it. It's amazing because there's nothing left. All the words in the Oxford English Dictionary are gone as domain names. So, you know, if you find something you have a great domain name, do it. And then thirdly, you know, can I trademark it? Is it inherently trademarkable? Is it available in my categories and in my countries as a trademark? And as long as a name can kind of get through those hoops, whether the CEO's wife likes it, whether you happen to have some negative associations about it, doesn't really matter. Like, try and take the subjectivity out. A name is a vessel that's going to hold your intellectual property. It mustn't have a hole in it, an intellectual property hole, like it can't be trademarked. It's not that important that you love it. And in 2 or 3 years' time, you will love it.
Okay, so the first thing, some easy things you can do is check availability, hop online and have a look for hashtags, have a look for social media handles and see what's up for grabs. You know, it's really, really great if you can get some really consistent things, you know, URLs, hashtags that sort of fit with your name or are very close, that sort of stuff. And if someone's got something totally that you need, you know, think about taking on a different name. Also think about SEO optimization. So you really want to find keywords. What sort of keywords will you be using in order to put onto your website? And think about incorporating these into your name. Maybe you know you can do that.
That's a good idea, actually. A really good idea. Yeah, search the keywords and don't stuff your name with 25 keywords because you'll have a silly name. But pop a few in. Yeah, it's a good idea.
And then next, obviously, is you've got to check for trademark. Does someone else have this? And you can do this yourself. There's some really quick things you can do. You know, do a quick search. Make sure that it's not already taken. You know, you do not want to have a trademark that someone else has already got. You know, you can go online. You can go to gov.uk and you can do check trademarks.
Or your patent office in whatever country you're listening to this from. Yeah.
Indeed. And then in terms of URL, you know, I think there's register.123 GoDaddy, or there's all sorts of places you can just check and try and get the .com. So whatever your name is, .com. That's great if you want to be global. If you just want to be in one country,
I don't know. I disagree with that. I don't think you need a .com. I don't think most companies need a .com. You know, like if you're looking to be global, get the .com. If you can get the .com, it's great. But so many, you know, if you're just in the UK, if you're just in Tanzania, if you're just in Taiwan, like you probably don't. You can probably get away with .co, your country. And there are so many other suffixes now, .co, .biz, all sorts of other things that, you know, I think too many people kind of lose a lot of good names in search of the .com. So I would disagree with that, but I agree with everything else you're saying.
Interestingly, it's quite interesting working with like clients in Egypt and places like that. You know, we talked about the .com, so we sort of honed down the list, and they often say, I really don't care about the .com actually. They just want one for the country. So, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. And then I suppose also make sure your name speaks the right right language. So, you know, check for cultural sensitivity. Again, some of these things you can do online. Other things you're gonna have to ask people who speak languages, stuff like that. You know, phone friends, family. Make sure that you check your name thoroughly, really, to see if it means anything inappropriate, as we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and if you do that, you should, you know, be looking good. And I really, if you're following our advice, I really, really hope that you don't end up on our list or anybody else's list of hilarious naming cock-ups. We don't want you to end up on the, you know, most embarrassing brands list. I
think, you know, if you do start it out, just wait and see. You know, if you started investing in your name, unless it's really, really, really bad, and you just at the beginning of the process, you know, stick with it. I think people don't like change. You know, don't have a knee-jerk reaction to stuff.
Piers, what do you think of our name, Marketing Global Edition?
Rubbish. No, I thought it was. It's a bit generic and boring, but the .com was available, so we grabbed it.
Look, we are passionate about being global. That is, you know, that's in our DNA. We're trying to, you know, every week bring you, you know, stories, ideas from around the world, from our experience working all over the world. So I'm going to stand by it. I'm going to defend it, and I'm going to say to you that this has been Marketing Global Edition with me, Jasmine Montgomery,
and me, Piers Geiler.
All right, well done. Okay, so join us same time, same place next week. But goodbye for now.
Thanks. Bye-bye.